Elden Ring. Pretty cozy game to someone like me. I'm a normal, average guy who likes tragic and depressing character stories set in a backdrop of misery with a hint of imminent apocalypse. A world teeming with adversity, insurmountable odds, and eldritch horrors beyond comprehension whose very appearance drives even the most stable people straight over the edge and plummeting into the abyss of insanity. Also, I love all the controversy around these fucking games. I'll be honest with you guys, I've rewritten this script like 7 times and tried to record it an equal number of times, actually probably more. And I keep finding new things to talk about, finding new things to add, and I'm never quite satisfied with this video. But I'm just going to try to get it out so it's just done, so I stop thinking about it, because I want to talk about this topic because it's very important to me. I'm just really passionate. So, it's also no secret that this game is really popular and beloved by millions. Probably one of the hardest games to ever win Game of the Year. I want to say that the original Dark Souls also won Game of the Year, and I would say it's probably harder, just because it has less options, less variety in its. You know, you don't have the ability to go and fight a bunch of other bosses to level up and grind out souls, and you don't have as many weapon options and build options and whatever. But there were a lot of harsh critics on the release of Elden Ring, and they said some pretty strange things, but it ultimately amounted to nothing. It was mostly just contrarianism. I think people were annoyed that a community they never involved themselves in got a massively successful game that hit mainstream appeal like no other in its genre, so they kind of just wanted to silence the overwhelming amount of love pouring out into the world for this kind of landmark achievement in gaming, which it absolutely is. But it did win awards all over the place, and as a result, 2 years later, we get every critic and influencer trying to get ahead of the inevitable contrarianism by pouring it on super thick with praise for the DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. And I'm serious in my tinfoil hattery this time when I say that I believe this is actually what happened. Extra love seems to have been given to this game from critics who didn't want to lose credibility by saying a popular thing wasn't their speed, and from influencers who likely wanted to drown out some of the ridiculous hot takes with positive vibes. But of course, those are popular and famous people doing it, so now we have people within the fan base who are being contrarian, not in response to the community around the game so much as the famous people who like it and are making liking it a mainstream opinion. Suddenly, everyone has to be a hipster. Mixed reviews on Steam for a DLC that, if it were its own game, like if it was released in place of the original base game of Elden Ring 2 years ago, would have gotten the same level of praise that Elden Ring itself got on release. I don't know how people don't see that. Like, this DLC is the size of a Dark Souls game, and is open world, and is amazing, and is beautiful, and is still leagues above anything that's been done in the previous Dark Souls games. I just feel like it's weird that people are like, this is a terrible DLC, despite pretty much being, I think, from every like objectively measurable metric, it is just better in pretty much every way. It's not perfect, and it's not even my favorite DLC that FromSoft has made, but it's still incredible. I don't know. That's just my take. That said, I should just go ahead and address the valid criticisms first. They're the ones I think that hold more weight. Performance being the main one. I think it's an issue. There are a lot of places that have frame rate drops, and sometimes it drops for no really obvious reason. I do think this is probably just how the engine handles loading and unloading assets. I think there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that is a little bit of a struggle for this particular engine because it was never really designed for an open world. And yes, they've modified it to make it more capable of this, but it still has, I think, certain legacy things that are probably getting in the way. But I personally am not super familiar with how this engine works. Someone like Zulu the Witch or, I don't know, I'm trying to remember the names of some of the other big creators who've gotten dug deep into the engine and understand it better. But those people would be better to talk about that than me. However, with all of that said, I will note that the notorious XVD stutter that I used to experience is gone. Thank fucking God. I don't know if that was a change within Windows or if FromSoft adjusted something in their engine to make that go away, but I'm just fucking glad it's gone because it was really annoying. There's also... I've heard that there's an issue with Intel processors, some of the higher end processors. I believe Luke Stevens talked about this, where higher end Intel processors have performance cores and efficiency cores. Efficiency cores are lower speed cores that are designed to handle background tasks mainly and can't handle some of the more complicated things that a video game would require from them. But for whatever reason, FromSoft's engine doesn't discern between the two different types of cores and therefore ends up sending complex calculations to these lower speed cores, and it can cause a bunch of stutters and issues. But to me, I have to point out, I don't think that's entirely a failing on FromSoft's part, because that's Intel. Intel's the only one doing it as far as I'm aware, and it's a proprietary technology that in all likelihood doesn't actually provide anything notable in terms of performance gains. And it is kind of insane to expect that all software that exists is going to cater to this one specific type of architecture within a certain processor line. That's a little weird to me, because that kind of stuff happens all the time where we get gimmicky hardware things that they do that don't actually end up sticking because it's really hard to program for and it's not super common, so there's no reason to program for it. Another great example would be SLI or Crossfire, the multi-GPU setups that were being used a few years ago and have been phased out and discontinued because they're really complicated. They don't really provide performance gains, and it's really difficult to program around them, and also super uncommon, so nobody did it. So I think that FromSoft, if they're made aware, should probably patch the engine to be able to handle those Intel processors, but for the most part, I don't think it's that big of a deal, and I'm sorry that you're still buying Intel products after all the bullshit they keep doing, such as this. The next thing I want to point out is the loot in this game. There is a lot of loot to be had in this game and in the DLC, but it is also kind of pointless a lot of the time. I just don't need this much glovewort or this many rune consumables. I would have actually been happier with more merchants. We did get some bell bearings, which is super nice, but they only give you DLC items and not some of the craftable ingredients that you need to make certain builds work, like a bow build, for example. Or if you wanted to go full perfumer and have those perfumer consumables, you still have to grind out materials, which is pretty frustrating. I don't think that's really the greatest feeling for gameplay. I think that they should probably have fixed that a little bit. That said, I think that all these rune consumables and glovewort are probably useful and allow for like easier progression for those who struggle to not lose all of their runes or are having a hard time with bosses. But when I fight through a dozen blood fiends who are fighting Mesmer's soldiers to get access to this new secret cave I found, and it contains an even harder blood fiend who kicks the shit out of me a few times before I manage to take him down, and then he doesn't drop anything, and the cave itself only has this little consumable item that I'll never use and I could have crafted, that's extremely disappointing. And particularly because I'm an arcane build, so my main is an arcane build. And so I was hoping, maybe I'll get some cool arcane spell or weapon, and no, I didn't get anything. And on the topic of being an arcane build, I'm actually an arcane faith caster build. Prior to the heavy nerfs, I was mainly bleed focused with some Dragon Communion stuff on the side in order to make use of, obviously, the Dragon Communion seal, which is the one that scales with arcane, and also because a lot of things are immune to bleed. I also had Seppuku on an Occult Godskin Peeler. I've since changed my build, but it was drippy and it was effective, so I just really liked it. This DLC does have a lot of arcane scaling weapons, but none of them really fit my build. A lot of them, like there's a couple that are high strength requirement and a couple that are spears, and I don't use spears. I don't like poking stuff. I would have liked a weapon with a decent amount of arcane scaling, or even something that's arcane faith. because there's not a single weapon that I know of in the game that does Arcane Faith scaling as its primary stats, even though Arcane Faith should be a fairly common build considering how the casting works with the Dragon Communion Seal. Yeah, I thought that was really weird. And of course, there's also the problem with the occult infusion on weapons where you can't buff the weapon for whatever reason. I don't know why that is. It doesn't seem to have any other features to balance that out. I guess you could say blood loss and poison buildup are increased, but if you're not running blood loss on a, like if you have a weapon that doesn't have innate blood loss, then you're not really getting that benefit from having an occult infusion because it doesn't give you blood loss or poison buildup. So yeah, it seems a little bit of a missed opportunity to me. And yeah, so most of the weapons in the DLC that have arcane scaling, they require me to take points out of faith or to put into dex or strength, and don't really have something that can really fit my build. So I didn't really get anything that notable. I ended up switching to a greatsword though, and it does run really well. I do like it, but ultimately that's just me kind of bitching about my own build. I should probably move on to something more potent. The weapons in the DLC overall are actually pretty amazing. I like I said, I feel like they're lacking in certain areas, but overall it's a pretty good spread we got. The new spells are mostly lackluster. A couple standouts, but a lot of them are a really high requirement, super flashy poise check. They don't have any hyper armor a lot of the time. You just end up getting this really amazing spell from a really tough boss, only for it to take 19 years to wind up, and then you get knocked out of it instantly. And it still drains your FP, but it doesn't do any damage because you got knocked out of it. And you only get one new blood spell, but it can't be obtained until you beat the final boss of the DLC, so it's pretty fucking disappointing. Editor Dakota here. I just discovered from Rusty's newest video that the new blood spell doesn't actually inflict blood loss buildup. So we didn't actually get any new blood spells, which is like, what the fuck? And on top of that, Ansbach's set apparently doesn't buff it, and also doesn't buff, despite supposed to be buffing Blood Boon related things, doesn't buff Blood Boon Ritual from Moog Spear, which to be fair probably didn't really need it, but also doesn't buff Bloodblade Dance on Eleonora's Pole Blade, so that's a huge issue. What the fuck? We got some spells with some really high arcane requirements, like Bale's Tyranny and Bale's Flame Lightning. I went with the latter because I don't want to roar at things. And it's kind of like the Dragon Claw Incantation with a lightning AoE, except I can't hit anything with this. When it does, on occasion hit, it does amazing damage, but the hitbox appears to be like the size of my fist, rather than, the big dragon arm that I am currently bringing down on someone's face. And there's also the huge lightning strike surrounding it. Doesn't seem to hit often either. I don't know what the hell's going on with it, but I stopped using it because of that. So to recap real quick before we get to the meat of this discussion, we talked about performance issues, which I think is a valid complaint, though it's never been enough to ruin the experience for me. I've had 2 crashes so far, and the frame rate rarely drops in highly critical moments, just usually very strange moments when I'm in the overworld. However, it has gotten me killed a couple times on, like, Commander Gaius, I think. I do have an issue with loot, but it's not so much with what is found in the DLC, just where certain things are found. Like there's like bosses that don't drop the unique spell that they're using on you. You get that somewhere else in a different dungeon. It's very strange where things are placed at times. There's also the combat tools. A lot of great new stuff, some lame spells here and there. My main build went through a really awkward phase after the heavy nerfs and everything, but is now stomping lots of stuff. I've beaten the DLC on her, and she is very, very capable, I would say. I also have a lot of other builds. I have an Icy Sorceress who got a couple new spells and 2 new weapons, though no new cold spells, which is very sad because I think we only have like 5. My Colossal Weapon Power Stancing Strength build got like a new talisman and a new helmet. But he doesn't really need anything because he's a strength build, and strength builds are easy mode in all FromSoft games that I've played, and no one will ever convince me otherwise. I have my Eileen the Crow claw build, who got new drip, a new set of claws that are not exactly befitting her setup. I mean, they're split damage, which is kind of annoying. but they can be power stance somewhat effectively, and their ranged option is pretty solid. I have a Faith build who is probably going to shift into a Faith Intelligence build. Got a couple new incantations that slap pretty hard. Layer Rings of Light is pretty notable, in fact. But no new weapon, because nothing really outperforms the Blasphemous Blade even after the nerf. It heals you. Like what more can I say? It heals you. It's incredible. And then I have a bow build who is surprisingly effective. I got a few new bows to try out and some excellent new talisman. And she's pretty great, but again, my consumable problem still exists, having to grind out runes in order to buy my consumables, but then also having to grind out crafting materials to craft certain consumables. It's a nightmare, especially since a lot of the crafting materials don't respawn after they've been collected from the overworld, so you have to grind them from enemies, which is like, the drop rate sucks. She's not an arcane build, like she's a quality build. I don't know what to do. But there's new build options as well. There's Martial Artist, there's Perfumer. I'm really liking my Perfumer so far. She's a lot of fun to play. Very difficult. There's a lot of issues with, I think, how it's programmed, but overall it's fine. It's, for the most part, it's fine. So the first thing, I wasn't originally going to talk about this because it hadn't come up yet when I first wrote this script. But I'm stuffing it in here kind of in the middle because it became more prominent than I expected it to. But I guess this big person in the industry who talks about these sorts of things as well had kind of a big video come out talking about wanting a pause button in Elden Ring. Now, I'm a little surprised, but I honestly shouldn't be, that this is still a fucking hot-ish topic in the discourse. I'm going to level with you on this. If you have kids, they are more important than whether or not you die to a boss in a video game. I'm really sorry, but if you can't make the choice to put down the controller, even if it means dying, in order to stop your kid from doing something they shouldn't be doing in the first place, you should not be playing this type of game. And frankly, probably shouldn't be raising kids. Like, you wouldn't be playing Apex Legends if you were so worried about your kids getting into shit while you're in the middle of a match, because it's an online game. Elden Ring, I know, I understand it is a single player game. However, the point of it is to be immersed in a world that is constantly at odds with you. You are in a harsh, apocalyptic environment that is punishing. There are break areas, there are safe zones that you can absolutely use. In my case, if I'm literally walking through a fog gate into a boss fight and I have not picked up my 200,000 runes that I just dropped on my last death, but I get an incoming phone call, I will seriously put down my controller and answer the phone. I've done it a number of times. Even if I know the call won't be like an emergency, you know, it could be someone just calling to confirm an appointment that I have coming up or something, I still will just put down the controller because it takes priority over a video game. It's IRL stuff. If I really need to get those runes back or make progress, I can just come back later when I have more time. The game's not going anywhere. I can finish it at my leisure. It's not a multiplayer game at its core where once the community falls off, the game dies out, you don't have people to play with anymore. It's not like that. It's single player. You can come back to it whenever you feel like. It's not that big of a deal. It's weird because, like, people in my generation, our parents constantly tried to teach us that IRL comes first. And, you know, the game's not going anywhere. You come back to it later. Just go do the dishes, for fuck's sakes. But it's weird. So it's weird to me that there's people in the industry that can't figure this very basic concept out. IRL comes first. Like, even if I'm in an online game, playing with friends or strangers, they will understand if I have to get up because there's an emergency. Like, I'm sorry, but if like the cops shot my neighbor outside or they found a bomb threat and they're evacuating me, that takes precedent. Like, I think about that stand-up bit that Dave Chappelle did where someone's phone rang in the middle of his show, and he didn't even get mad at it. He's just like, I'm not mad, just go to deal with your shit. Because, like, that's just it, right? He understands that people have priorities. he's not the most important thing in the world. He wants to do his show uninterrupted, but the thing is the guy probably had a babysitter or something that was calling because of an emergency, or maybe like, you know, he goes out into the hall, he takes the call, and his mom dies. Like, there could be so many things, and they're more important than a comedy show. Just like there are so many things in real life that are more important than the game you're playing. Like, if you know that that's not how these games are designed, why are you playing it if you're so concerned about your kids getting into shit? Which you absolutely should be concerned with. I'm just saying. Absolutely valid concern. So why are you playing Elden Ring? Like, what? I mean, especially in front of kids. It's a violent game. I wouldn't be doing that personally. Like, I'm not going to say that video games cause violence, but I'm not going to expose my kids to it all the time. Like, are you kidding me? I wouldn't let a 10-year-old watch Deadpool. I don't know. So, overall, I would say these complaints don't seem too bad, but that stuff is not really at the core of the issue that people have with this DLC from what I've seen. The main complaint that I've seen is that this DLC is way too hard. People are getting one or two shot through 60 vigor. Bosses are insanely aggressive right off the bat with extremely long combos with difficult to learn dodge timings. Some bosses have a ton of health and so forth. There's just a lot. Of course, I have to address the obvious thing here and say that when you buy a FromSoft Games DLC, you're kind of signing up for a dick flattening. Like, that's what's going to happen. Like, you're not going to breeze through DLC content in a FromSoft game. It's supposed to challenge you more than the base game did, because you've already mastered the base game by the time the DLC comes out. That's what they expect. With that in mind, let me give you a little bit of anecdotal shit for a second. None of my friends are currently playing this DLC, really, so I only have my own experience to share. All of my builds are about halfway through the DLC right now, except for the one that's completed it. Like, my main has completed literally every part of the DLC. I've 100%ed it, unless some secret comes out that nobody knows yet. But I've done everything on her, and that everything you can do in a single playthrough. I haven't gone back and done some of the things some of the other choices that you kind of get locked out of if you make a different choice. But anyways, of all of those characters, one of them has 40 vigor, and the rest have 25 or less. I beat the game on my 25 vigor builds. I run mostly damage talismans because I'm a DPS whore in every game I play, with an occasional swap out for a defensive talisman if there's like one particular attack that I'm having trouble avoiding and it's one-shotting me consistently. But generally speaking, it's not a problem. I can run, I don't often do it, but I can run the uplifting aromatic if I really need. I also have the bubble tier to prevent at least one high damage attack. My Eileen the Crow build was a sort of a challenge run where I ran all the way to the Altus Plateau at the start of her playthrough to grab the Raptor Talons, and then spent the entire game soloing every boss with only my claws, no summons, all that stuff. This build killed pre-nerf Radon. Solo, no summons. Now, that's not me trying to brag. It does come across that way, I'm sure, but it's not what I'm trying to do. It's not like I never summon for bosses, or never get, help with them. It's not like it's not like I never cheese things either. Looking at you, Commander Gaius, I'm not even really that good, but I do know how to build a character, and I know what these games expect from me as a player. And while it may be subjective for the most part, I would say outright that this is nowhere near the hardest FromSoft DLC. It's not perfect, and there are definitely some boss encounters that could probably use some tweaking, but I am shredding through bosses on a 25 vigor Arcane Faith build. Arcane Faith caster. And that's not to say I'm not having trouble at any point. I absolutely am. But what astonishes me the most is that people are saying this DLC is too hard while the Old Hunter exists and is universally beloved. Nothing in the DLC for Elden Ring has given me nearly as much trouble as even Melania or Malekith. Well, Malekith on certain builds has been so much more of a struggle than anything in this DLC. I just, if you think this DLC is too hard, you need to go down this well in the fishing hamlet. Do that, and then try to tell me that Shadow of the Erdtree is too fucking hard. Some people complain about Rolana while calling her Renala, which I get. The naming is very weird. Like, most people think that her fight is cool, but say she's too hard. Like, she's tough, but she's really just a game of patience, like most FromSoft bosses. Also, the moon attack, yeah, just jump it. This isn't Dark Souls anymore. A lot of people complained about the Golden Hippo as well. This is my main's first encounter with it. To be fair, the Hippo was slightly bugged at launch, meaning people were getting hit by its bite attack without being near it, but that's already been patched, and yeah, I was experiencing that too. I was behind its front leg and got hit by its bite, which was at, like, it was aiming in front of it, not to the side or anything, just in front of it, and I still got hit by it. It was absolutely bugged, and but they've already fixed it. I've noticed that it's fixed because I've stood in the same place and not gotten hit by the bite anymore, which is great, but my ultimate point here is that while there are some flawed bosses, I think those are a few outliers, and none of them are necessarily entirely bad. I would say Commander Gaius is probably the worst in my opinion. He's just passed a legacy dungeon where you can't summon Torrent, but Torrent is suddenly summonable in his boss arena. I think that's intentional, but it's also a red herring. Torrent gets one shot by most of his attacks, even with several revered Spirit Ash upgrades. Combat on Torrent is also hot garbage. Yes, I'm going to say it. He handles like shit. He's slower than Gaia, which I believe is the name of Gaius' boar. And attacks on horseback are sluggish, hard to aim, and if you're ranged or a caster, particularly with incantations, you're kind of screwed. His charge requires a frame-perfect, almost pixel-perfect dodge. He has very little downtime between attacks, and sometimes that charge he'll do 2 to 3 times in a row, which is basically a guaranteed death sentence. So yeah, I cheesed his sorry ass on my first try, on my first character, but I've beaten him 4 more times on other characters and done them legit. He's not very fun though. I don't think he's designed very well, but that's just my experience. The same is kind of true for the Fire Giant. I'd say the Giant is less egregiously bad, but he's still a nuisance most of the time on many of my builds. And I would say Gaius is even still a nightmare to fight on my OP as fuck strength build. And although he's easier to stagger than the Hippo sometimes, which is very strange to me. I did notice in Asmongold's tier list of bosses for the DLC, he put, is it Cinesax? I don't remember all the names, but the ancient dragon Cinesax, I think is what she's called, at the bottom of the tier list for the DLC. And I agree. Absolutely. Because I personally would just shit on Gaius and say Gaius is the worst. But I mean that in the sense of Gaius is the worst new boss. Because the ancient dragons aren't really bad fights necessarily. They don't have the bullshit charge type. They don't have anything that matches the bullshit charge of Gaius. Even the fact that Cinesax is in water while being extra annoying and not fun, I don't think is as egregiously bad as Gaius's charge and a couple of his like really long combos. But Cinesax is literally just a base game Ancient Dragon fight put in the DLC. There's no difference, and it's really annoying. And you don't even get anything cool from her or from the other dragon bosses. Like you get Ghost Flame Ignition or Ghost Flame Breath, and that's it. Like that's the only new dragon spell you get outside of Bale, the big dragon fight, even though there's several dragons in this DLC. That's frustrating as fuck. And totally fair to call Cinesax the worst boss in the DLC. I just think that it's not the worst boss in the whole game. And since it's just a base game boss, it's really dumb that it's here. But Gaius is the worst new boss, in my opinion. Another point of discussion I've seen relating to bosses is input reading. This one really bothers me because I honestly don't think it's as prominent as people believe it is. It's becoming sort of a catch-all excuse for when someone messes up their timing for a heal or an attack. Like, they're using it as an excuse, like people use lag in an online game as an excuse. And that's not to say it doesn't exist in Elden Ring. It does. It's been admitted by the developers, in fact. It absolutely exists, but bosses are not capable of reading or at least reacting to player inputs while performing another action. Timing a heal while the boss is recovering from certain attacks is important and always part of the strategy for fights in FromSoft games. You can also abuse their input reading when casting spells, as their only program response to a spell cast tends to be an instantaneous dodge on cast, so slower projectiles that don't fire off immediately will roll catch them consistently, and their dodges often take enough time to recover from that you can follow with a faster projectile if you're quick. On top of that, Elden Ring has these amazing night sorceries that bosses cannot react to. I will say, though, in terms of boss AI in the DLC, is that their aggro functionality is really disorienting. Sometimes the boss will launch an attack towards an NPC or co-op summon, but then suddenly curve it and target the player instead. It's very strange. Many of the bosses do this, and sometimes they switch targets mid-combo chain. I don't think that's good design, and it's impossible to prepare for an attack that you don't know is incoming. I think it's mainly designed to punish casters who stack insane amounts of spells while the boss is distracted in a long combo on an NPC summon, and end up deleting their health bars before other mechanics can play out. But if that's the case, there needs to be a better indicator of who the boss is targeting. Otherwise, it feels unfair. Like it used to be that a boss changing aggro will be doing it after an attack chain and will just turn on the spot to face you before firing an attack off. I'm not saying that needs to change, and I honestly think the idea of having a boss change targets in the middle of an attack chain is good design. I do like that because honestly, some of these attack chains being super long adds more challenge and is more fun and interesting to get those 6 dodges in a row down, like Ackman was saying in his video. I think that's really fun and engaging, and having the ability to have a boss change focus in the middle of an attack chain can really add more challenge and make it so that casters aren't always cheesing things, but it needs to just be telegraphed a little better. That's all I'm saying. I also will say that the final boss is buggy. I think I don't know if they fixed it yet or not. I don't think they have, but there's something wrong. I got video. All in all, I would love to see people who think this DLC is too hard to go fight Ludwig, or Orphan of Cause, Lady Maria, or even Midir, Slave Knight Gale, Sister Frida. Well, I'm gonna be honest with you, Sister Frida kicked the shit out of me on my first playthrough, but all my other playthroughs, she's been a total pushover, and I don't know why that is. I don't think it's because she's an easy boss. I think I just, like, my other builds were just more suited for her, or, like, I personally just, like, my personal playstyle just really works for countering hers. I don't know, but anyways, a lot of people do find her hard, and reasonably so. Shadow of the Erdtree bosses are certainly not pushovers, but would the DLC be as memorable if they were? I mean, sure, Shadowlands have some of the most beautiful areas I've ever seen, but I think they're made more special because of how hard I fought to reach them. On the opposite side of this debate are people who claim that FromSoft's games are hard but fair. I understand their point, but let me rebut that a little bit and provide a more in-depth explanation. FromSoft games are decidedly not fair all the time. Go back and play the Capra Demon fight in Dark Souls 1 and try to tell me that shit's fair. But technically speaking, it is fair. I know that's confusing, but hear me out. Within the rules of the game world that it establishes for you, all of the enemies, all of the bosses tend to use the same set of rules as the player in terms of strength, strategy, and reactivity, but they do cheat. An enemy hiding around a corner with a one-shot grab ability is not fair play in terms of honorable combat. But that's the harsh reality these games take place in. It's still within the same rule set the player uses. You can hide around a corner and ambush an enemy just as well as they do to you. And that's where the fairness really is. Enemies will try to cheat you, but you have the same tools to cheat them back. There are bosses or enemies who are way more powerful, and the odds end up stacked against you, but that's the role that you take up in these games. The Chosen Undead isn't some Destiny's champion fated to save the world. The Tarnished is not a god sent to right the wrongs of the mortal realm. You're just a person, and often an under-equipped, last-ditch effort to challenge insurmountable odds to accomplish something truly spectacular. Kinda like Miyazaki did by making brutally difficult games with convoluted lore that subvert many modern game design tropes and turn that into a mainstream, widely successful, industry-changing phenomenon. They are not perfect, but they are huge achievements that overcame tremendous hardship to exist at all, let alone become Game of the Year. And I want to nail home really this point about cheesing enemies and using unfair tactics against enemies who will do the same to you. It's kind of like a street fight. You take every advantage you possibly can to come out on top. This is true in competitive esports gaming as well. This is how it works. You use every edge available to you to get as much performance as you possibly can out of your strategies and playstyle. And what that means is that there is no invalid way to play these games. Use Summon Ashes, use co-op, use spells that are overpowered, use everything that you can that feels fun to you, and avoid the things that don't feel fun if you want to challenge yourself. And that's the thing about Elden Ring. Elden Ring, in my opinion, is simultaneously the easiest and the hardest FromSoft game ever. And the reason I say that is because if you play Elden Ring like you played Dark Souls, it will be harder than Dark Souls. But if you play Elden Ring like Elden Ring wants you to, with all the freedom of choice and all the open world elements, you can make it so much easier on yourself. And you don't have to sweat and scream and slam into a brick wall. I mean, it's not going to be as easy as a Mario game, but it's not going to be as hard as Dark Souls or Bloodborne. I think Bloodborne's way harder and way more limited in terms of build options, frankly. So all the elitists who say, oh, it doesn't count that you beat this boss because you used the Blasphemous Blade. I've actually heard that take. That's ridiculous. Axeman talked about it in his video. That's how I found out. So credit to him for finding that. But holy fuck, what a stupid take that is. I mean, oh my God. I know he won't be as harsh as I am on that, but oh my God, that's the stupidest crap I've ever heard. You use the Blasphemous Blade. You're a cheater. What? They just nerfed it too. Like, it's... And don't get me wrong, even after the nerf, it's still a very powerful weapon, but it's like, you're not staggering enemies constantly with it anymore, which I think is a good nerf. I think that, like, I still use it because even with the nerf, I think it's still a good weapon, but like, fuck, man. It doesn't invalidate your playthrough. Fuck off. It's not like a Nier Automata where you can literally buy the achievements with in-game currency. Like, and I don't even think that's cheating. It's something they put in the game intentionally, so just use it if you want. Like, I don't fucking care. Like, I don't know, not everybody wants to fish. I didn't. I still did it, but like, I didn't want to. So, one last thing I want to mention about bosses in this DLC is that it seems like the devs designed them with a very specific goal in mind, and that is to make them diverse enough that you can't just use one overpowered strategy for every fight and expect it to work out fine. I think they wanted people to have to adjust their approach depending on what the bosses throw at them. Not to the point of having to respec entirely, but at least so that the OP meta shit isn't as much of a constant fallback plan. They want bosses to throw us curveballs, and in my opinion, this is good design and very welcome in a DLC for a game like this. Let's bring this thing to a close after all this time. This DLC is, in my opinion, easily one of the best ever made. Not just in FromSoft's already prestigious lineup, but like the expansions on combat, locations, art design, and lore are all so potent. There are lots of stuff I have issues with, like Gaius, or the lack of certain lore tidbits I was personally curious about and hopeful they were going to add. It was sad that they introduced some new stuff that led me to believe there was going to be some interesting things down the new rabbit holes they opened up, only to not really find anything at the end. I think the biggest thing is with the Blood Fiends, who didn't really get fleshed out that much and don't offer all that much to bleed builds or the lore of their god, who I assume is the Formless Mother. They don't tell us, but it's pretty obvious it's what they're worshipping. And then there's the Saint of the Bud, who's like, who the fuck is this? Is she buds with Melania? Pun intended. And why only one more Scarlet Rot weapon? I mean, there is the Poison Flower blooms twice, which does apply Scarlet Rot buildup. I was very surprised by that. By the way, use it. It's very good. Why Pink Kindred? How can it be Scarlet Rot if it is pink? But those are just minor things, and more shit will probably be discovered soon by everyone's favorite content creators in the FromSoft space. And I will say, here's my biggest thing, is that the final boss is a pretty big letdown. It is very frustrating for me to fight a character we already killed in the base game as the big final boss of the only DLC FromSoft has planned for this game. If there were more DLCs, it probably wouldn't be as egregious, but it is really frustrating that this is supposed to be the big finale of this game, and it's really not. I think it would have been more interesting if, while Miquella was trying to resurrect Radahn, Godwyn's influence corrupted him into some nightmarish monstrosity, or hell, some other cosmic influence gets involved. It's also strange to not get a new ending for the base game or have this DLC literally not affect anything whatsoever, especially, again, since it's the only DLC we're getting and it doesn't feel like it's on par with Ringed City, which gave a satisfying conclusion to a Dark Souls trilogy, or Old Hunters, which gave a satisfying conclusion to Bloodborne. And some people even want to side with Miquella or have the option to reunite Miquella with Saint Trina because he really did her dirty. I agree with that. Also, I want you to check out this one mod someone made to represent Radahn in his prime. It is so much cooler than the actual DLC final boss we got, and it's entirely fan-made. Pretty nuts in my opinion. Also, Asmongold is the reason I found out about it. He showed it on his channel, and it's incredible. It's such a cool thing. So definitely go check out that mod. Yeah, that's probably enough yapping from me. I am really passionate about this. I hope I haven't pissed anyone off. Well, I don't know. There's certain people I hope got pissed off by this, but honestly, I am speaking from the heart. It is all genuine. I do really want people to think a little bit more critically about this and enjoy the things they want to enjoy without facing criticism or facing sort of like insecurity from playing the game in the way that they want to. And I also really, 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 really want people to stop trying to force their own game design philosophies onto another artist. That is not fair and not right. You wouldn't tell Bob Ross that he is bad at painting because he doesn't use acrylics or whatever. I don't know what type of paint he uses, but you wouldn't do that. So why would you tell another artist that they are objectively bad at doing what they do because they didn't do it the way that you want it? If it's not for you, it's not for you. And I hate saying that because it does feel exclusionary. But again, I mean, tampons aren't for me. So I don't really want to be included in that market either. Games aren't for everyone. And I can't believe I'm having to explain that outright, but games are not for everyone. Not all art is going to appeal to you. That's how it works. So if you don't like it, don't play it. And I'm really sad that they're not doing more DLC for this. I really like it. But I'm curious to see what they do next. I would love a Bloodborne remake on PC, especially. Or sequel even would be nice. I'm curious to see everyone else's thoughts. So please leave a comment. Let me know what you think about it. And if you liked my ramblings, come back for more. I've also got like an X/Twitter account that I'm on somewhat regularly where I also make fun of dumb things. So come hang out, and I will see you all next time. Bye.
Woo.